Hi, so a while ago I bought this Chinese CNC engraver machine. This is the 3040, which is the version that's got ball screws rather than the cheaper ones. It was mostly for doing stuff like, PCB outlines and making up little jigs and so on. And it's, I'm actually pretty pleased with it for the price. Okay, it's not super rigid. It does make some quite nasty noises if you try and machining sort of solid materials too heavily. But I think, within its capabilities, it's actually been a really useful piece of kit. The one thing that I wasn't that happy with, it comes with like a demo version of Mach 3. Now Mach 3 seems to be pretty much the universal software that people use for this sort of thing, but it's getting, it's fairly old in that it uses sort of PC parallel ports, so you've got to hook it up to an old PC, which just takes up space, and it's a bit of a mess. So I've been sort of looking, for what I want to do, which is basically just load a file in and just run it. Having a PC there is a bit of a pain, so I've been sort of vaguely on the lookout for something which is a nicer solution. There's the other issue, like if you want to quickly just do a very quick, even just drilling a few holes in something, you don't really want to wait for the PC to boot up just to do that. It'd be nice to have some just standalone operation. You just turn the thing on, whiz it left and right and do what you want to do, and then finish. Now, a while ago I did buy a smoothie board with sort of the intention of maybe using that, but the thing that put me off is it doesn't really have a local interface. What I'd really need is something that lets me sort of set up the zero locally after loading the file in, so I never really got around to actually doing anything with this. But a while ago I sort of spent an evening idly browsing around Aliexpress and Banggood, and I saw this thing, which is basically a standalone, which is sort of basically a standalone controller, which appeared to do pretty much exactly what I wanted. It wasn't that expensive. I think it's about 120 quid or something. And I thought, well, if this does the job, this would be absolutely perfect for what I want. So ordered one and just recently got around to setting it all up. The one sort of slightly odd thing is I could find very, very little information online about this. I couldn't find any manufacturer website. The most information I had was a few pages of stuff on the Banggood product listing page. And there's a few sort of videos, Chinese videos that just show a few very brief things, but I couldn't really find any sort of reviews, comments, or anyone that's actually used it. So sort of got the thing out of curiosity and thought, well, let's take a look at it. So it came in this fairly nondescript box with these happy little people on the front. So you get the basic unit itself, panel mount brackets. Obviously this is designed to go and mount on a panel, so that just screw and clamp it to the rear of the panel. I/O connector, so on the back we've got the basic power in and motor out controls on a fixed terminal block, not a plug-in one. And then you've got these two plug-in boards on the back, which are not exactly elegant, but they do the job. They do supply screws to actually screw these down. Got 16 inputs. These are for limit switches, e-stop and whatever other inputs you want. And there's an output board. This has got a PWM to 1 to 10 volt converter for spindle control, so you can have either PWM or 1 to 10 volt spindle control. And there's loads of other outputs, of which the software only appears to only support one function at the moment, which is some sort of reset indication. There's nothing else implemented at the moment. The other thing that it comes with is an micro SD card and a USB micro and full-size SD card reader. I think one possible reason they supply this is actually an 8 gig card, which is, you get a ludicrous amount of G-code on that. It does appear to be a little bit fussy about cards. There are some cards that it works with and some that it doesn't, so maybe one reason for supplying it is, well, here's one that definitely works with it. So maybe that's why they've done that. There's also what I'm assuming is an RS-232 port on the back. I'll have a little player with that, see if we can get it to do anything, but there's no documentation of any sort comes with it. It's just pretty much here it is, off you go sort of thing. And in terms of the hardware, it sort of feels okay. The model number SMC4-4-16A16B. I'm guessing that one of these is the number of axes, one is the number of inputs, one is the number of outputs. Hardware wise, there's a couple of things that I'm not super happy with. One is the fact that it uses micro SD, and obviously in a sort of machining type environment, micro SD cards are very easy to sort of lose and disappear. I think a much better solution, the ideal solution I think would have been a USB memory stick socket, because those are obviously a lot more robust because you've got a separate connector, or failing that, a full-size SD card connector. I suppose if you really wanted to, you could sort of hotwire a full-size SD socket and mount it externally, just to give something that's just a little bit bigger and less likely to get lost. The other thing which I think is a little bit silly, the supply voltage is 9 to 12 volts. Now obviously in a CNC environment you're often going to have 24 volts available, so it would be much nicer if this supply range went up high enough to run it off a 24 volt supply directly. Case is sort of, yeah, it's quite a nice little case. The buttons, it's got like sort of clicky domes on here, and although it's like a membrane keyboard, so it's probably moderately resistant to sort of oil and gunge, of course, but the card slot isn't. A bit of a fail on that side of thing, but for a front panel thing, there's probably not a huge amount they could have done. So it might be nice if they'd had some sort of external thing. Maybe you could plug an external drive in to keep it a bit further away from the front panel. But not the end of the world for the money you're paying. Now what I've done to power it is, inside there's plenty of space inside this box, so I've just put a little 24 to 12 volt DC to DC converter and an extra socket on the back to provide 12 volts power out, just to avoid having the mess of an external power supply on it. Right, so pull the back off. First thing we see is a ton of opto isolators. There's switch mode supply regulator here. Now interestingly, this is a M2576S, and as far as I can see, the only reason why this won't run up as high as 24 volts is this input capacitor. So it probably wouldn't actually be that difficult to modify it. Also it looks like there's a footprint here for an isolated DC-DC converter. So presumably if you need, I'm not quite sure why you'd need that extra isolation, but that might be another way of providing a 24 volt input. This has just been sort of solder bridged across, so it probably wouldn't be difficult to mod this to run on a 24 volt supply. Up here on this backboard, you can see the RS232 transceiver hasn't been populated, so it probably indicates that it's not used. Interesting, this connector is actually marked Modbus. Now my understanding is that Modbus uses RS485, but there's no sign of any RS485 transceiver on here, unless that's accessed through this this header. If you look at the main board, it's pretty much all opto isolators for the I/O and just some drivers for that. And this seems a slightly odd way of doing it, because also you've got these external connector boards, because you could, yeah, there are systems where you wouldn't actually need these external boards at all. So it seems a little bit odd that they've, you've got all these opto isolators, a lot of which are for inputs that you're probably never actually going to use. So it would seem to make more sense to actually put them on these boards and perhaps make these optional, because there's a fairly ridiculous number on here. And apart from, say, you've got the ones for the main step and direction things, I think the bigger ones are probably higher speed ones for the step direction IOs. Overall build quality looks pretty decent actually. It's mostly surface mount. Through-hole stuff looks like it's been hand soldered but done reasonably neatly. So build quality wise, I've got no complaints. Say it's manufacturer appears to be ShaoGe. I can't find any web presence at all for that. Certainly as the English spelling, it may well be. They've got a Chinese website. If you translate that to Chinese, maybe there's some information, but I just cannot find any information. There's no name on the front. Fairly typical for Chinese products, sort of fairly no name, and the idea is that whoever buys it sort of puts their own branding on it. But if you sort of do a Google search just for this phrase, you'll see a few Chinese videos, but no, there's no. I can't find any manufacturer presence on the web at all, or even any resellers. There's just almost no information at all. And if someone can find sort of even a Chinese website for the manufacturer, please sort of let me know, and I'll stick it in the comments down below, put a link to it. But I can't find anything from the English. And on the front board, there's really almost nothing. There's an STM32F407 Cortex-M4 processor, 3.3 volt regulator, serial flash, and just really nothing else. There's just the back of the buttons. There's the micro SD card that's mounted on this little right angle board. It's a bit of a fiddle, I think, taking this. I'm not going to even bother taking this board out because it's pretty obvious. It's just going to have all the connectors on it, and the LCD connector on there. It's a bit of a tricky to get out, so I'm not going to bother. Again, these are all hand soldered, but yeah, there's a bit of flux, but it's not too bad. It's quite nice that all the component values are labelled, none of this nonsense of grinding numbers off that you see with some Chinese companies. So yeah, build wise, I'm Just taking a quick closer look at this power supply circuit, and in fact the only cap on the input is this 100 off 50 volts, so just turned it up to 25 volts and it just works quite happily. You know, the current draw drops down as you'd expect. It's about 120 milliamps at 12 volts. It's now 70 milliamps at 25, 26 volts. So that label is just basically wrong. This thing appears to be entirely happy working on 24 volts. Nothing getting warm. So yeah, it's convenient. Right, so I'm just going to run through all the functions on this. One nice thing, starts up very quickly, sort of turn it on, bang, ready to go. No, you know, they haven't done anything stupid like run Linux or anything in there, so it's just what you want from a sort of standalone controller. I'm just going to go through all the menu things first. So the first thing is open file. That just shows you what's on the card. It's not smart enough to spot when you swap cards, but if you just go up, it will then show you what's on the next one. It is a little bit fussy about the cards. I've had one or two cards that it didn't want to read. Minor annoyance, but not really a major deal. Obviously it doesn't support long file names, as you sort of expect. So you load the file, keep open, and then bang, there's your G-code in there. You can sort of scroll through and read. And then if you're just loading run, literally load that file, hit the run button, and away it goes. That's all very nice. Obviously you can pause it, and you can tell it sort of to back off and restart. One thing I noticed, this up here appears to be the current line that it's playing back, but what it doesn't do is sort of scroll down here, which is rather annoying. It's a bit silly. It doesn't actually show you the line. It just shows you a line number up here and doesn't give you any matching line number in here. One thing I have noticed, when you press stop, it seems to be a little consistent. Sometimes it will stop, sort of go to the end, and then when you press start, press play again, it starts from the beginning. But sometimes it stops where it is and gives you this, you know, it works as if it was a pause. So it just, you know, doesn't seem to be really any logic behind which it does. But you know, as long as you sort of keep an eye on what it's asking you, then that's tolerable, I suppose. Machine, this is all the machine setup. So you've got your motor function, so these are the steps per millimetre, maximum speed, acceleration, yeah, polarity for step and direction, and the step pulse lengths. These may or may not be the optimum ones for this CNC. I've just put some values in that works. Haven't really spent much time tweaking these. Limited in, this is your limit switch inputs. So from those 16 inputs you've got on the rear board, you know, which pins are enabled, which ones, what the polarity is, and so on. Home, this is for inputs for a home position switch on each axis, and some stuff about the zeroing probe. Not totally sure what this reference core thing is all about. And IO out, this is the output controls. There seems to be only one that does actually do anything, which is follow reset. I'm assuming that means a state, you know, after the thing is reset, to give us, yeah, some signal to tell something else when something's been reset. Soft limit, these are just limit positions for all the axes, so you can put some, say for example if you only have home switches and no limit switches, you can actually set up soft limits here. G-code, this is various parameters to do with G-code. I don't really know what that is, but I'm sure if you know about G-code this might make some sense. On chord length, I assume that's the how smoothly it does curves. This backup, it seems to use this for parameters that aren't currently used. Key I/O, this lets you assign some functions to the input pins, like run, emergency stop, pause, return home, etc., just so you can have some external buttons to do those functions if you want. It doesn't appear to have any facility of like an external handheld sort of manual pulse generator, which is slightly annoying. And then spindle, so you can have it control the spindle. You've got clockwise, anti-clockwise control, coolant control, and PWM parameters for the output from that. I haven't rigged up the spindle control, it's not something I particularly need for what I use. About this just gives you various sort of information, various firmware versions. Everything is 0 point something or other, but it does seem to be reasonably functional as far as I can tell. Test, this is just shows the status of the input, so if I press the E-stop, you see that changes. That's just quite a handy way of making sure your inputs are working. Obviously that would be really handy if you're setting up your limit switches, and this does what you can still use the manual controls in this mode, so this would be very handy for testing limit switches and so on. Factory, this is factory reset. I'm not quite sure what this code thing is. I think because I've now changed it from the factory settings, maybe it has some sort of password protect or something, but I'm not actually sure. I don't want to mess up the settings now, so when I first got it I don't recall it asking for that, so I'm not totally sure what that's about. And the other thing, just a language selection, so there's 2 different flavours of Chinese, but fortunately it's fairly easy to get it back into English. And when you go into the setups, it goes into sort of an e-stop state, so you have to go there and reset that. And if you've got the external stop, you press that, it shows that, but when you release the external stop, you don't have to manually reset it here, it recognises that you've released it. Now, edit file, it does actually have facilities for editing your G-code. Now, obviously it's and there's a few things in here actually, create new file, delete file, add a folder. It's not the sort of thing you'd really want to do on a user interface like this, but it could be handy if there's just like one little thing you need to tweak on a file. So for example, I can go to that line, I can delete the line. I have no idea what auto program int means. Oh, Teardown. Okay, so maybe that lets you edit. Okay, so it lets you create coordinates and so on, apparently. So it's not really the sort of thing you'd. So then you can just edit. Not entirely sure. Yes, as it's actually using this as a keypad. There are some additional letters as shift functions on here, so you can sort of create G-codes again. Sort of not something you do extensively, but if you just wanted to tweak one little thing on a sort of G-code thing, that I suppose that might be vaguely useful. Exit back from that. Now the button functions, this again, these symbols may well be familiar to people familiar with CNCs. I don't know how standard they are. So you've got this is to, gives you various options, return to home or the 0 coordinate position, or do a probe to set the 0, so if you return to 0, it'll just go back to 0 position. This is for setting 0, so if I set up where I want my 0 to be, I can then go here, I can either set an individual axis or just set all axes to reset them to 0, so that's fairly quick. Yeah, that's probably the main thing that you, certainly from my point of view, why not, just load the file, set the 0 point and go. That's really what I really want from it. This is to do with, these are the various reference points, G54 to 59. I'm not entirely sure how this works. There is something, if you go into AF, there's something here that seems to let you set up these various positions. Again, I'm not familiar enough with how these work, but the idea is you can set various reference points for and offsets and so on, but I'm not sure how that actually gets used in practice. And there's something here for helical angle. Again, I've no idea what that's about. So back to the keypad, so you've got the XYZ, so you can just enter and immediately, so for example, I can tell it just to go to a position, and it'll just go to that position manually for all the 4 axes. And you can also set, so for example, if I want to set this to be, that position to be 10, I can say change coordinates, so it now recognises that as 10, so instead of 0ing you can actually set a coordinate to a specific value, which might be handy for offsetting like material thicknesses and so on. And the numeric interface, generally sort of you get, for the entries, you tend to either have to click the encoder or press OK to get it to turn green, which then means you can do a numeric entry and then do OK afterwards. There doesn't seem to be a way of just clicking with the encoder and then doing like an up down with the encoder. There's no sort of velocity sensing or anything. It might be nice to actually be able to do that, but again, it's not a huge issue. It's not something you're going to use very often, but just one of those minor things that could be improved. So the second line, F, which is feed rate, so you can select different feed rates. I think this applies only to the manual, manual entry, rather than what it gets from the G code. So we'll set that there, so that's now running really slowly. And it does seem to store that non-volatile, so that you set up a sensible rate for manual operation, and it does seem to remember that after the next power up, which is sensible. This M button doesn't appear to do anything. This is for manual jogging. So for example, if I go 1mm, then every time I press this button it moves by exactly 1mm, and I can set a certain value. So for example, this might be handy if you wanted to drill a grid of holes or something. I could say, for example, if I set that to 10, then every time I press that it will go by a certain value. It would be nice to be able to set that separately for the different axes, but not a huge deal. Now the shift, when you press shift, you sort of seem to get this different set of coordinates. I'm really not sure what this is all about. There's an M on all of them, so I'm not sure whether that's to set up just some alternate position or something, but I can't really figure out what that's about. If anyone's got any ideas. Yeah, it seems to be some sort of offset coordinate position. Maybe it's to do with this G54, yeah, these different G positions. But I don't really know what that's about, but it seems to be something that's applying some sort of offset or something. These F1 to 5 buttons don't appear to do anything in any mode. I would certainly hope there's some facility for updating the firmware, or if there wasn't anything obvious, they do ever update this to provide more functionality. You can just stick it on the card and update it. Now when it's running, you can press the encoder, you can either adjust the feed rate, so I can slow it right down, or I click it and then adjust the spindle speed again, because I've not turned the spindle, enabled spindle control. That doesn't actually do anything. What's annoying is you can't adjust it over 100%, so if your file's got a too slow a feed rate, you can't actually increase it here, so you generally want to make sure that your G-code's got the maximum feed rate, and then you can reduce it using this function. Seems to be fairly arbitrary steps that this uses. I'm not quite sure. It's going from 100 to 90.9, so it's maybe reducing it by sort of perhaps 10% per click, whereas I think you might actually want something slightly finer control than that sometimes. I can't immediately find, there might be a setting somewhere to set that, but I couldn't immediately see it. These arrows just seem to do basically the same function as the encoder. There are a few occasions where the user interface gets sort of into a slightly odd mode. So for example, if you open the file, the encoder's now in this menu. I can't figure out how you're actually supposed to get back to over here. There isn't like one specific key that does it consistently. If you do like a run stop, say back, you can actually do it sort of by going there. But then once you're in here, I can't figure out how you can get it back over here to be able to scroll through and browse to the G-code again. But again, I mean, obviously if you haven't edited the file, the easy way, you just load the file again. It's a minor annoyance. It's not a huge deal. It's certainly not a deal breaker. It's sort of like a lot of these things. I've yet to see it crash or do anything really stupid. It's just, we all know the Chinese can't design user interfaces very well, and there's just a lot of minor little points here which will be, it would make it a lot nicer to use. But I think it's one of these things, once you get used to the quirks of it, it's perfectly fine, perfectly usable. So it's certainly a lot better than I was expecting from a Chinese product, which is probably about as much as you can hope for these days. So I mean that's sort of pretty much it. But this button here, this appears to just be an e-stop. It's like a soft e-stop. Again, I'm not sure how we actually get back to there other than say escape doesn't, OK doesn't. Let's just go into it. Yeah, if you seem to need to sort of go into them, even then we're not actually in there. That one of the things I noticed, once you're in the file menu, it seems to actually be virtually impossible to get out of it, unless if you flip the card out, you get the open error. There are one or two instances where you have to use OK rather than the push on the encoder as well. This display update could do with being a little bit faster. It's a bit sort of clunky and steppy, but again, not really a huge issue. It's not really an issue when you're doing it manually. So it might be nice if it moved a little bit more smoothly, but not a huge deal really. So that's pretty much it as far as the functionality. I mean, it does appear to pretty much do certainly everything that I want it to do. there's a few silly things like, the edit file is a bit superfluous, I think, but at least it's, you can just ignore it. But basically all the basic things that I want to do is really, load in a G-code file, set the 0, press go, and then adjust the feed rate as it's going. So I mean that actually seems to do that. I've not really used it in anger. I will, as and when I will do, if I find any major issues, I'll maybe do an update on this. So I think all in all, this is quite a nice little product. I did try throwing some serial commands at it, see if it could respond at all, but no, it looks like there's no serial implementation at all in there, unless it's something fairly obscure. All in all, it sort of seems to do the job I want to do. A few minor little quirks and annoyances, but nothing sort of really major, and certainly much better than I was anticipating from China. The lack of documentation is a little bit disappointing, but pretty much the only thing I haven't really figured out is this shift thing, which I'm sure with a bit of time wouldn't be too difficult to work out. Apart from that, I think it's quite a nice little unit. Now, if you're looking for these, the key search thing seems to be offline CNC. So I think I got mine from Banggood.com. I think it was probably around this price. I paid 122 quid. So there is a little bit of information here on this page, and this is really as much documentation as I found anywhere. There's a little bit of information about sort of how the switches are wired up and how the spindle motor stuff connects. That is, and sort of how to put the menu into English. That's pretty much it. It's also Aliexpress. There's quite a wide range of pricing. The cheapest one I saw was £109 there, 102. They all, as far as I can see, they all seem to include the I/O connectors, although they also seem to list these, sell these separately as well. But when I was looking at this, I also found this one, which seems a similar sort of thing. Got much bigger screen, no encoder knob on the front. The other nice detail on this one is it actually uses a USB memory device instead of a micro SD, and obviously that's mounted on the side, so you could just use a little extension cable to put that onto a panel mount socket somewhere that's easier to get at. So this one's a little bit more expensive. I don't think I'll really, unless I find some real problem with the one I've got, I doubt I'll bother getting one of these. But so this does have quite a nice big display on it. It also claims somewhere here, yes, it says 500 kHz stepper control. And I think somewhere it mentioned, yes, it uses an FPGA to do the actual pulse generation, so this is maybe a slightly higher performance device. Got 16 opto inputs, only 3 opto outputs, which makes more sense because I don't really know why that one had so many outputs. One's 10 volt spindle control or PWM. This, yes, it's actually 4 channel. It says support 3 channel stepper control. It does appear to have 4 axes on there. It says it does have a hand pulse interface. So that's been some sort of MPG interface. So this looks like a slightly higher end version. It's the same size, and also it has all the connectors on board rather than as the external plug-in. So this actually looks in some ways a neater unit at a sort of just a slightly higher price. I don't know whether this has come from the same company or there's no obvious sort of brand name there, but that might be worth a look if you're after something a little bit different.